Robinson Crusoe by Daniel DeFoe. Read aloud by Samantha Dunn. Part 8. I cannot say that after this, for 5 years, any extraordinary thing happened to me. But I lived on in the same course, in the same posture and place, just as before. The chief things I was employed in, besides my yearly labor of planting my barley and rice and curing my raisins, of both which I always kept up just enough to have sufficient stock of 1 year's provisions beforehand, I say. Besides this yearly labor, and my daily labor of going out with my gun, I had one labor, to make me a canoe, which at last I finished, so that by digging a canal to it of 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, I brought it to the creek, almost half a mile. As for the first, which was so vastly big, as I made it without considering beforehand, as I ought to do, how I should be able to launch it. So never being able to bring it to the water, or to bring the water to it, I was obliged to let it lie where it was, as a memorandum to teach me to be wiser next time. Indeed, the next time, though I could not get a tree proper for it, and in a place where I could not get the water to it at any less distance than, as I have said, near half a mile, yet as I saw it was practicable at least, I never gave it over. And though I was near 2 years about it, yet I never grudged my labor, in hopes of having a boat to go off to sea at last. However, though my little periagua was finished, yet the size of it was not at all answerable to the design which I had in view when I made the first. I mean, of venturing over to terra firma, where it was about 40 miles broad. Accordingly, the smallness of my boat assisted to put an end to that design, and now I thought no more of it. But as I had a boat, my next design was to make a tour around the island, for as I had been on the other side in one place, crossing, as I already have described it, over the land, so the discoveries I made in that little journey made me very eager to see the other parts of the coast. And now I had a boat. I thought of nothing but sailing round the island. For this purpose, that I might do everything with discretion and consideration, I fitted up a little mast to my boat, and made a sail to it out of some of the pieces of the ship's sail, which lay in store, and of which I had a great stock by me. Having fitted my mast and sail, and tried the boat, I found she would sail very well. Then I made little lockers or boxes at either end of my boat, to put my provisions, necessaries, and ammunition, etc., into, to be kept dry, either from rain or the spray of the sea, and a little long hollow place I cut in the inside of the boat, where I could lay my gun, making a flap to hang down over it to keep it dry. I fixed my umbrella also in a step at the stern, like a mast, to stand over my head and keep the heat of the sun off me, like an awning. And thus I every now and then took a little voyage upon the sea, but never went far out, nor far from Little Creek. But at last, being eager to view the circumference of my little kingdom, I resolved upon my tour, and accordingly I victualled my ship for the voyage, putting in 2 dozen of my loaves, cakes I should rather call them, of barley bread, an earthen pot full of parched rice, a food I eat a great deal of, a little bottle of rum, half a goat and powder and shot for killing more, and 2 large watch coats, of those which, as I mentioned before, I had saved out of the seamen's chests. These I took, one to lie upon, and the other to cover me in the night. It was the 6th of November, in the 6th year of my reign, or my captivity, which you please, that I set out on this voyage, and I found it much longer than I expected, for though the island itself was not very large, yet when I came to the east side of it, I found a great ledge of rocks lie about 2 leagues into the sea, some above water, some under it, and beyond that a shoal of sand, lying dry half a league more, so that I was obliged to go a great way out to sea to double the point. When first I discovered them, I was going to give over my enterprise and come back again, not knowing how far it might oblige me to go out to sea, and above all, doubting how I should get back again. So I came to an anchor, for I had made me a kind of an anchor with a piece of broken grappling which I got out of the ship. Having secured my boat, I took my gun and went on shore, climbing up upon a hill, which seemed to overlook that point, where I saw the full extent of it and resolved to venture. In my viewing the sea from that hill where I stood, I perceived a strong, and indeed a most furious current, which ran to the east and even came close to the point, and I took the more notice of it because I saw there might be some danger that when I came into it I might be carried out to sea by the strength of it, and not be able to make the island again. And indeed, had I not gotten first upon this hill, I believe it would have been so, for there was the same current on the other side of the island, only that it set off at a further distance, and I saw there was a strong eddy under the shore. So I had nothing to do but to get in out of the first current, and I should presently be in an eddy. I lay, however, 2 days, because the wind, blowing pretty fresh at east-southeast, and that being just contrary to the said current, made a great breach of the sea upon the point, so that it was not yet safe for me to keep too close to the shore for the breach, nor to go too far off because of the stream. The 3rd day, in the morning, the wind was having abated overnight, the sea was calm, and I ventured. But I am a warning piece again to all rash and ignorant pilots, for no sooner was I come to the point, when even I was not my boat's length from the shore, but I found myself in a great depth of water, and a current like the sluice of a mill. It carried my boat along with it with such violence that all I could do not to keep her so much as on the edge of it, but I found it hurried me farther and farther out from the eddy, which was on my left hand. There was no wind stirring to help me, and all I could do with my paddlers signified nothing. And now I began to give myself over for lost, for as the current was on both sides of the island, I knew in a few leagues' distance they must join again, and then I was irrevocably gone. Nor did I see any possibility of avoiding it, so that I had no prospect before me but of perishing, not by the sea, for that was calm enough, but of starving for hunger. I had indeed found a tortoise on the shore, as big almost as I could lift, and had tossed it into the boat, and had a great jar of fresh water, that is to say, one of my earthen pots. But what was all this to being driven out into the vast ocean, where, to be sure, there was no shore for 1,000 leagues at least? And now I saw how easily it was for the providence of God to make the most miserable condition mankind could be in worse. Now I looked back upon my desolate, solitary island as the most pleasant place in the world, and all the happiness my heart could wish for was to be but there again. I stretched out my hands to it with eager wishes. "Oh, happy desert," said I, "I shall never see thee more. Oh, miserable creature," said I, "whither am I going?" Then I reproached myself with my unthankful temper, and how I had repined at my solitary condition, and now what would I give to be on shore there again? Thus, we never see the true state of our condition till it is illustrated to us by its contraries, nor know how to value what we enjoy but by want of it. It is scarce possible to imagine the consternation I was now in, being driven from my home, from my beloved island, for so it appeared to me now, into the wide ocean, almost 2 leagues, and in the utmost despair of ever recovering it again. However, I worked hard, till indeed my strength was almost exhausted, and kept my boat as much to the northward, that is, towards the side of the current which the eddy lay on, as possibly I could. When about noon, as the sun passed the meridian, I thought I felt a little breeze of wind in my face, springing up from the south-southeast. This cheered my heart a little, and especially when, in about half an hour more, it blew a pretty small gentle gale. By this time I was gotten at a frightful distance from the island, and had the last cloud or hazy weather intervened, I had been undone another way too far, for I had no compass on board, and I should never have known how to steer towards the island if I had but lost sight of it. But the weather continuing clear, I applied myself to get up my mast again, and spread my sail, standing away to the north as much as possible to get out of the current. Just as I had set my mast and sail, and the boat began to stretch away, I saw, even by the clearness of the water, some alteration of the current was near, for where the current was too strong the water was foul, but perceiving the water clear, I found the current abate, and presently I found to the east, at about half a mile, a breach of the sea upon some rocks. These rocks I found caused the current to part again, and as the main stress of it ran away more southerly, leaving the rocks to the northeast, so the other returned by the repulse of the rocks and made a strong eddy, which ran back again to the northwest, with a very sharp stream. They who know what it is to have a reprieve brought to them upon the ladder, or to be rescued from thieves just going to murder them, or who have been in such like extremities, may guess what my present surprise of joy was, and how gladly I put my boat into the stream of this eddy, and the wind also freshening, how gladly I spread my sail to it, running cheerfully before the wind, and with a strong tide or eddy underfoot. This eddy carried me about a league in my way back again, directly towards the island, but about 2 leagues more to the northward than the current which carried me away at first, so that when I came near the island, I found myself open to the northern shore of it, well, that is to say, the other end of the island, opposite to that which I went out from. When I had made something more than a league of way by the help of this current or eddy, I found it was spent and served me no further. However, I found that being between the 2 great currents, viz., that on the south side, which had hurried me away, and that on the north, which lay about a league on the other side, I say, between these 2, in the wake of the island, I found the water at least still, and running no way, and having still a breeze of wind fair for me, I kept on steering directly for the island, though not making such fresh way as I did before. About 4 o'clock in the evening, being then within about a league of the island, I found the point of the rocks which occasioned this disaster stretching out, as is described before, to the southward, and casting off the current more southwardly, had, of course, made another eddy to the north, and this I found very strong, but not directly setting the way my course lay, which was due west, but almost full north. However, having a fresh gale, I stretched across this eddy, slanting northwest, and in about an hour came within about a mile of the shore, where, it being smooth water, I soon got to land. When I was on shore, I fell to my knees and gave God thanks for my deliverance, resolving to lay aside all thoughts of my deliverance by my boat, and refreshing myself with such things as I had. I brought my boat close to the shore in a little cove that I had spied under some trees, and laid me down to sleep, being quite spent with the labor and fatigue of the voyage. I was now at a great loss which way to get home with my boat. I had run so much hazard and knew too much the case to think of attempting it by the way I went out, and what might be at the other side, the west side, I knew not, nor had I any mind to run any more ventures. So I only resolved in the morning to make my way westward along the shore, and to see if there was no creek where I might lay up my frigate in safety, so as to have her again if I wanted her. In about 3 miles or thereabouts, coasting the shore, I came to a very good inlet, or bay, about a mile over, which narrowed till it came to a very little rivulet, or brook, where I found a very convenient harbor for my boat, and where she lay as if she had been in a little dock made on purpose for her. Here I put in, and having stowed my boat very safe, I went on shore to look about me, and see where I was. I soon found I had but a little passed by the place where I had been before, when I travelled on foot to that shore. So taking nothing out of my boat but my gun and my umbrella, for it was exceedingly hot, I began my march. The way was comfortable enough after such a voyage as I had been upon, and I reached my old bower in the evening, where I found everything standing as I had left it, for I always kept it in good order, being, as I said before, my country house. And now happened something to change my whole life on the island. One day at noon, while on a stroll down a part of the shore new to me, what should I see on the sand but the print of a man's foot? I felt as if I was bound by a spell, and could not stir from the spot. By and by, I stole a look round me, but no one was in sight. What could this mean? I went 3 or 4 times to look at it. There it was, the print of a man's foot, toes, heel, and all the parts of a foot. How could it have come there? My head swam with fear, and as I left the spot, I made 2 or 3 steps, and then took a look around me, and then 2 steps more, and did the same thing. I took fright at the stump of an old tree, and ran to my house as if for my life. How could aught in the shape of a man come to that shore, and I not know it? Where was the ship that brought him? Then a vague dread took hold of my mind, that some man, or set of men, had found me out, and it might be that they meant to kill me or rob me of all I had. How strange a thing is the life of a man! One day we love that which the next day we hate. One day we seek what the next day we shun. One day we long for the thing which the next day we fear, and so we go on. Now, from the time that I was cast on this isle, my great source of grief was that I should be thus cut from the rest of my race. Why, then, should the thought that a man might be near give me all this pain? Nay, why should the mere sight of the print of a man's foot make me quake with fear? It feels most strange, and yet not more strange than true. Fear kept me indoors for 3 days, till the want of food drove me out. At last I was so bold as to go down to the coast and to look once more at the print of the foot, to see if it was the same shape as my own. I found it was not so large by a great deal, so it was clear there were men in the isle. Just as this time my good watchdog fell down dead at my feet. He was old and worn out, and in him I lost my best guard and friend. One day, as I went back from the hill to the coast, a scene lay in front of me which made me sick at heart. The spot was spread with the bones of men. There was a round place dug in the earth, where a fire had been made, and some men had come to feast. Now that I had seen this sight, I knew not how to act. I kept close to my home, and would scarce stir from it to save milk my flock of goats. To feel safe was now more to me than to be well fed, and I did not care to drive a nail or chop a stick of wood, lest the sound of it should be heard, much less I would fire a gun. As to my bread and meat, I had to bake it at night when the smoke could not be seen, but I soon found the way to burn wood with the turf at the top of it, which made it like chark or dry coal, and this I could use by day, as it had no smoke. One day as I went home, I was struck by the sight of some smoke, which came from a fire no more than 2 miles off. From this time I lost all my peace of mind. Day and night a dread would haunt me that the men who had made this fire would find me out. I went home and drew up my steps, but first I made all things round me look wild and rude. To load my gun was the next thing to do, and I thought it would be best to stay at home and hide. But this was not to be borne long. I had no spy to send out, and all I could do was to get to the top of the hill and keep a good lookout. At last, through my glass, I could see a group of wild men join in a dance around their fire. As soon as they had left, I took 2 guns and slung a sword on my side, and then with all speed I set off to the top of the hill, once more to have a good view. This time I made up my mind to go up to the men, but not with the view to kill them, for I felt that it would be wrong to do so. With such a load of arms, it took me 2 hours to reach the spot where the fire was, and by this time I got there, the men had all gone, but I saw them in 4 boats out at sea. Down on the shore, there was a proof of what the work of these men had been. The signs of their feast made me sick at heart, and I shut my eyes. I durst not fire my gun when I went out for food on that side of the isle, lest there should be some of the men left, who might hear it and so find me out. This state of things went on for a year and 3 months, and for all of that time I saw no more men. On the 12th of May, a great storm of wind blew all day and night. As it was dark, I sat in my house, and in the midst of the gale I heard a gunfire. My guess was that it must have been from some ship cast on shore by the storm. So I set a light to some wood on top of the hill, and that those in the ship, if ship it would be, might know that someone was there to aid them. I then heard 2 more guns fire. When it was light, I went to the south side of the isle, and there lay the wreck of a ship, cast to the rocks in the night by the storm. She was too far off for me to see if there were men on board. Words cannot tell how much I did long to bring but one of the ship's crew to the shore. So strong was my wish to save the life of those on board that I could have laid down my own life to do so. There are some springs in the heart which, when hope stirs them, derive the soul on which such force that to lose all chance of the thing one hopes for would seem to make one mad. And thus was it with me. Now, I thought, was time to use my boat, so I set to work at once to fit it out. I took on board some dry grapes, a bag of rice, some goat's milk, and cheese. At dawn, I set out to sea, and in less than 2 hours, I came up to the wreck. What a scene was there! The ship was struck on 2 rocks. The stern was torn by the force of the waves, and the masts were swept off. Ropes and chains lay strewn on the deck, and all was wrapped in gloom. As I came up to the wreck, a dog swam to me with a yelp and a whine. I took him on board my boat, and when I gave him some bread, he ate it like a wolf, and as to drink, he would have burst if I had let him take his fill of it. I went to the cook's room, where I found 2 men, but they were both dead. What a change had come on the scene! Once so wild with the lash of the waves and the roar of the wind, all was calm now. Death had done its work, and all had felt its stroke, save the dog, and he was the one thing that still had life. I thought the ship must have come from Spain, and there was much gold on board. I took some of the chests and put them in my boat, but did not wait to see what they held, and with this spoil I came back. I then set to work to bring my freight from the shore where I had left it. In the chest there were 2 great bags of gold and some bars of the same, and near these lay 3 small flasks and 3 bags of shot, which were a great prize. From this time all went well with me for 2 years, but it was not to last. One day, as I stood on the hill, I saw 6 boats on the shore. What could this mean? Where were the men who had brought them? And what had they come for? I saw through my glass that there was 1.5 at least on the east side of the isle. They had meat on the fire round which I could see them dance. They took a man from one of the boats who was bound hand and foot, but when they came to loose his bonds, he set off as fast as his feet would take him, and in a straight line to my house. To tell the truth, when I saw all the rest of the men run to catch him, my hair stood on end with fright. In the creek he swam like a fish, and the plunge he took brought him through it in a few strokes. All the men now gave up chase but 2, and they swam through the creek, but by no means so fast as the slave had done. Now I thought it was the time for me to help the poor man, and my heart told me it would be the right thing to do. I ran down my steps with my 2 guns and went with all my speed up the hill, and then down by a short cut to meet them. I gave a sign to the poor slave who came to me, and at the same time went up to meet the 2 men who were in chase of him. I made a rush at the first of these to knock him down with the stock of my gun, and he fell. I saw the one who was left aim at me with his bow, so to save my life, I shot him dead. The smoke and noise from my gun gave the poor slave who had been bound such a shock that he stood still on the spot as if he had been in a trance. I gave a loud shout for him to come with me, and I took care to show him that I was a friend, and made all the signs I could think of to coax him up to me. At length he came, knelt down to kiss the ground, and then took hold of my foot and set it on his head. All this meant that he was my slave, and I bade him rise, and made much of him. But there was more work to be done yet, for the man who had had the blow from my gun was not dead. I made a sign for my slave, as I shall not call him, to look at him. At this he spoke to me, and though I could not make out what he said, yet it gave me a shock of joy, for it was the first sound of a man's voice that I had heard for all the years I had been on the isle. The man whom I had struck with the stock of my gun sat up, and my slave, who was in a great fear of him, made signs for me to lend him my sword, which hung at a belt at my side. With this he ran up to the man, and with one stroke cut off his head. When he had done this, he brought me back my sword with a laugh and put it down in front of me. I did not like to see the glee with which he did it, and I did not feel that my own life was quite safe with such a man. He, in his turn, could but lift up his large brown hands with awe to think that I had put his foe to death, while I stood so far from him. But as to the sword, he and the rest of his tribe made use of swords of wood, and this was why he knew so well how to wield mine. He made signs to me to let him go and see the man who had been shot, and he gave him a turn round, first on this side and then on that. And when he saw the wound made in his breast by the shot, he stood quite still once more, as if he had lost his wits. I made signs for him to come back, for my fears told me that the rest of the men might come in search of their friends. I did not like to take my slave to my house, nor to my cave. So I threw down some straw from the rice plant for him to sleep on, and I gave him some bread and a bunch of dry grapes to eat. He was a fine man with straight, strong limbs, tall and young. His hair was thick, like wool, and black. His head was large and high, and he had bright black eyes. He was of a dark brown hue. His face was round and his nose small, but not flat. He had a good mouth with thin lips, with which he could give a soft smile, and his teeth were as white as snow. I had been to milk my goats in the field close by, and when he saw me, he ran to me and lay down on the ground to show me his thanks. He then put his head on the ground and set my foot on his head, as he had done at first. He took all the means he could think of to let me know that he would serve me all his life, and I gave a sign to show that I thought well of him. That next thing was to think of some name to call him by. I chose that of the 6th day of the week, Friday, as he had come to me on that day. I took care not to lose sight of him all that night, and when the sun rose, I made signs for him to come to me, that I might give him some clothes, for he wore none. We then went up to the top of the hill to look out for the men, but as we could not see them or their boats, it was clear that they had left the isle. My slave has since told me that they had had a great fight with the tribe that dwelt next to them, and that all those men whom each side took in the war were their own by right. My slave's foes had 4 who fell on their shore, of whom he was one. I now set to work to make my man a cap of hare's skin, and gave him a goat's skin to wear around his waist. It was a great source of pride to him to find that his clothes were as good as my own. At night I kept my guns, swords, and bow close to my side, but there was no need for this, as my slave was, in sooth, most true to me. He did all that he was set to do with all his whole heart in the work, and I knew that he would lay down his life to save mine. What could a man do more than that? And oh, the joy to have him here to cheer me in this lone isle! I did my best to teach him, so like a child as he was, to do and feel all that was right. I found him apt and full of fun, and he took great pains to learn all that I could tell him. Our lives ran on in a calm, smooth way, and but for the vile feasts which were held on the shores, I felt no wish to leave the isle. As Friday had by no means lost his zest for these meals, it struck me that the best way to cure him was to let him taste the flesh of beasts. So I took him with me the one day to the wood for some sport. I saw a she-goat in the shade with her 2 kids. I caught Friday by the arm and made signs to him not to stir, and then shot one of the kids. But the noise of the gun gave the poor man a great shock. He did not see the kid, nor did he know that it was dead. He tore his dress off his breast to feel as if there was a wound there. Then he knelt down to me and took hold of my knees to pray of me not to kill him. To show poor Friday that his life was quite safe, I led him by the hand and told him to fetch the kid. By and by I saw a hawk in a tree, so I bade him look at the gun, the hawk, and the ground, and then I shot the bird. But my poor slave gave still more signs of fear this time than he did at first, for he shook from head to foot. He must have thought that some fiend of death dwelt in the gun, and I think that he would have knelt down to it, as well as to me. But he would not so much as touch the gun for some time, though he would speak to it when he thought I was not near. Once he told me what he said to it was to ask it not to kill him. I brought home the bird and made broth of it. Friday was much struck to see me eat salt with it, and made a wry face. But I in my turn took some of that, had no salt with it, and I made a wry face at that. The next day I gave him a piece of kid's flesh, which I had hung by a string in front of the fire to roast. My plan was to put 2 poles, one on each side of the fire, and a stick on the top of them to hold the string. When my slave came to taste the flesh, he took the best means to let me know how good he thought it. One day, as we stood on top of the hill at the east side of the isle, I saw him fix his eyes on the mainland and stand for a long time to gaze at it, then jump and sing and call out to me. "What do you see?" said I. "Oh, joy!" said he, with a fierce glee in his eyes. "Oh, glad! There see my land!" Why did he strain his eyes to stare at the land as if he had had a wish to be there? It put fears in my mind which made me feel far less at ease with him. Thought I, if he should go back to his home, he will think no more of what I have taught him and done for him. He will be sure to tell the rest of his tribe all my ways, and then come back with it. It may be scores of them, and kill me, and then dance round me as they did round the men the last time they came on my isle. But these were all false fears, though they found a place in my mind a long while, and I was not so kind to him now as I had been. From this time I made it a rule, day by day, to find out if they were grounds for my fears or not. I said, "Do you wish to be once more on your own land?" "Yes, I'd be much glad to be at my own land." "Well, what would you do there? Would you turn wild and be as you were?" "No, no. I would tell them to be good. Tell them to eat bread, corn, milk. No eat man more." "Why? They would kill you." "No, no, they no kill. They love learn." He then told me that some white men who had come to their shores in a boat had taught them a great deal. "Then will you go back to your land with me?" He said he could not swim so far, as I told him he should help me go build a boat to go in. Then he said, "If you go, I go." "I go? Why, they would eat me." "No, we make them much love you." Then he told me as well as he could how kind they had been to some white men. I brought out the large boat to hear what he thought of it, but he said it was too small. We then went to look at the old ship's boat, which, as it had been there in the sun for years, was not at all in a sound state. The poor man made sure that it would do. But how were we to know this? I told him we should build a boat as large as that, and that he should go home in it. He spoke not a word, but was grave and sad. "What ails you?" said I. "Why you grieve mad with your man?" "What do you mean? I am not cross with you." "No cross? No cross with me? Why send you man home to his own land, then?" "Did you not tell me you would like to go back?" "Yes, yes, we both there. No wish self there if you not there." "And what should I do there?" "Well, you do great deal much good. You teach wild men be good men. You tell them know God, pray God, and lead new life." We soon set to work to make a boat that would take us both. The first thing was to look out for some large trees that grew near the shore, so that we could launch our boat when it was made. My slave's plan was to burn the wood to make it the right shape. But as mine was to hew it, I set him to work with my tools, and in 2 months' time we had made a good strong boat, but it took a long while to get her down to the shore. Friday had the whole charge of her, and, large as she was, he made her move with ease, and said he thought she'd go there well, though great blow wind. He did not know what I meant, that I meant to make a mast and sail. I cut down a young fir tree for the mast, and then set to work at the sail. It made me laugh to see my man stand and stare when he came to watch me sail the boat. But he soon gave a jump, a laugh, and a clap of his hands when he saw the sail jib and fall, first on this side, then on that. The next thing to do was to stow our boat up in the creek, where we dug a small dock, and when the tide was low, we made a dam to keep out the sea. The time of year had now come for us to set sail, so we got out all our stores to put them in the boat. One day I sent Friday to the shore to get a sort of herb that grew there. I soon heard him cry out to me, "Oh, grief! Oh, bad! Oh, bad! Oh, out there, boats! 1, 2, 3! Keep a stout heart," said I, to cheer him. The poor man shook with fear, for he thought that the men who brought him there had now come back to kill him. "Can you fight?" said I. "Oh, me shoot, but me saw 3 boats. 1, 2, 3. "Have no fear. Those that we do not kill will be sure to take fright at the sound of our guns. Now, will you stand by me and do just as you are bid?" "Me die when you bid die." I gave him an axe and 2 guns, each of which had a charge of swan shot. I took 2 guns as well and put large shot in them, and then hung my great sword by my side. From the top of the hill, I saw with the help of my glass that the boats had each brought 8 men and 1 slave. They had come on shore near the creek, where a grove of young trees grew close down to the sea. They had with them 3 slaves bound hand and foot, and you who read this may guess that what they were brought here for. I felt that I must try and save them from so hard a fate, and to do this I should have to put some of their foes to death. So we set forth on our way. I gave Friday strict charge to keep close to me and not to fire till I told him to do so. We went full a mile out of our way that we might get round to the wood to hide there. But we had not gone far when my old qualms came back to me, and I thought, is it for me to dip my hands in man's blood? God did not call me to be a judge for him. He who said, "Thou shalt not kill," said it for me as well as the rest of the world. So I resolved I would only go and place myself right near them, that I might observe their barbarous feast, and then I would act then as God should direct, and that unless something offered that was more a call to me than yet I knew of, I would not meddle with them. With this resolution I entered the wood, and with all possible weariness and silence, Friday followed close at my heels. I marched till I came to the skirt of the wood on the side which was next to them, only that one corner of the wood lay between me and them. Here I called softly to Friday, and showing him a great tree which was just at the corner of the wood, I bade him go to that tree, and bring me word if he could see there plainly what they were doing. He did so, and came back to me and told me they might be plainly seen there, that they were all about the fire eating the flesh of one of their prisoners, and that another lay bound upon the sand a little from them, whom he said they would kill next. And this fired the very soul within me. He told me that it was not one of their nation, but one of the bearded men whom he had told me of, that came to their country in the boat. I was filled with horror at the very naming of the white bearded man, and going to the tree I saw plainly by my glass a white man who lay upon the beach of the sea with his hands and feet tied with flags or things like rushes, and that he was a European and had clothes on. There was another tree and a little thicket beyond it, about 50 yards nearer to the place where I was, which by going a little way about I saw I might come at undiscovered, and that then I should be within half a shot of them. So I withheld my passion, though I was indeed enraged to the highest degree, and going back about 20 paces, I got behind some bushes, which held all the way till I came to the other tree, and then came to a little rising ground, which gave me a full view of them at the distance of about 80 yards. I had now not a moment to lose, for 19 of the dreadful wretches sat on the ground, all close huddled together, and had just sent the other 2 to butcher the poor Christian and bring him perhaps limb by limb to their fire, and they were stooping down to untie the bands at his feet. I turned to Friday. "Now, Friday," I said, "do exactly as you see me do. Fail in nothing." So I set down one of the muskets and the fowling piece upon the ground, and Friday did the like by his. And with the other musket I took my aim at the savages, bidding him to do the like. Then asking him if he was ready, he said, "Yes." "Then fire at them," said I, and at the same moment I fired also. Friday took his aim so much better than I, that on the side he shot, he killed 2 of them and wounded 3 more. And on my side I killed 1 and wounded 2. They were, you may be sure, in dreadful fear, and all of them that were not hurt jumped upon their feet, but they did not know which way to run, or which way to look, for they knew not from when their destruction came. Friday kept his eyes close upon me, that, as I had bid him, he might observe what I did. So as soon as the first shot was made, I threw down the piece and took up the fowling piece, and Friday did the like. He saw me cock and present. He did the same again. "Are you ready, Friday?" said I. "Yes," said he. "Let fly, then," said I, "in the name of God." And with that I fired again among the amazed wretches, and so did Friday. And as our pieces were now loaded with what I call swan shot, or small pistol bullets, we found only 2 drop, but so many were wounded that they ran about yelling and screaming like mad creatures, all bloody, and most of them miserably wounded, whereof 3 more fell quickly after, though not quite dead. "Now, Friday," said I, laying down the discharged pieces and taking up the musket that was yet loaded, "follow me," which he did with a great deal of courage, upon which I rushed out of the wood and showed myself, and Friday close at my foot. As soon as I perceived they saw me, I shouted as loud as I could, and bade Friday to do so, and running as fast as I could, being loaded with arms as I was, I made directly towards the poor victim lying upon the beach. The 2 butchers had left him at the surprise of our first fire, and fled in a terrible fright to the seaside, and had jumped into a canoe, and 3 more of the rest made the same way. I turned to Friday, and bade him step forwards and fire at them. He understood me at once, and running about 40 yards nearer them, he shot at them. While my man Friday fired at them, I pulled out my knife and cut the flags that bound the poor victim. And loosing his hands and feet, I lifted him up and asked him in the Portuguese tongue what he was. He answered in Latin, Christianus, but was so weak and faint that he could scarce stand or speak. I took my bottle out of my pocket and gave it to him, making signs that he should drink, which he did. And I gave him a piece of bread, which he ate. And then I asked him what countryman he was, and he said, Espanol. And being a little recovered, let me know, by all the signs he could possibly make, how much he was in my debt for saving his life. Senor, said I, with as much Spanish as I could make up, we will talk later, but we must fight now. If you have any strength left, take this pistol and sword and lay about you. He took them, and no sooner had he had the arms in his hands, but as if they had put new vigor into him, he flew upon his would-be murderers like a fury. I kept my piece in my hand, still without firing, being willing to keep my charge ready, because I had given the Spaniard my pistol and sword. So I called to Friday and bade him run up to the tree from whence we first fired, and fetch the arms which lay there that had been discharged, which he did with great swiftness. And then giving him my musket, I sat down myself to load all the rest again, and bade them come to me when they wanted. And the Spaniard coming to me for a gun, I gave him one of the fowling pieces, with which he pursued 2 of the savages, and wounded them both. But as he was not able to run, they both got from him into the wood, where Friday pursued them and killed one of them. But the other was too nimble for him, and though he was wounded, yet plunged himself into the sea, and swam with all his might off to those who were left in the canoe. The account of the whole is as follows. 3 killed at our first shot from the tree, 2 killed at the next shot, 2 killed by Friday in the boat, 2 killed by Friday, as those at first wounded, 1 killed by Friday in the wood, 3 killed by the Spaniard, 4 killed, being found dropped here and there in the wounds, or killed by Friday of his chase of them. 4 escaped in the boat, whereof 1 wounded, if not dead. 21 in all. Those that were in the canoe worked hard to get out of the gunshot, and though Friday made 2 or 3 shots at them, I did not find that he hit any of them. Friday would fain have had me take one of their canoes and pursue them, and indeed I was very anxious about their escape, lest carrying the news home to their people, they should come back perhaps with 200 or 300 of the canoes, and devour us by mere multitudes. So I consented to pursue them by sea, and running to one of their canoes, I jumped in and bade Friday follow me. But when I was in the canoe, I was surprised to find another poor creature lie there, bound hand and foot, as the Spaniard was, for the slaughter, and almost dead with fear, not knowing what was the matter, for he had not been able to look up over the side of the boat. He was tied so hard neck and heels, and had been tied so long, that he had really little life in him. I at once cut the twisted flags or rushes, which they had bound him with, and would have helped him up, but he could not stand or speak, but groaned most piteously, believing, it seems, still that he was only unbound in order to be killed. When Friday came to him, I bade him speak to him, and tell him he was safe, and pulling out my bottle, made him give the poor wretch a dram, which, with the news of his being delivered, revived him, and he sat up in the boat. But when Friday came to hear him speak, and look in his face, it would have moved anyone to tears to have seen how Friday kissed him, hugged him, cried, laughed, hallooed, jumped about, danced, sung, then cried again, wrung his hands, beat his own face and head, and then sung and jumped about like a man who had lost his mind. It was a good while before I could make him speak to me, or tell me what was the matter. But when he came a little to himself, he told me that it was his father. Well, this action put an end to our pursuit of the canoe with the other savages, who were now almost out of sight, and it was happy for us that we did not, for it blew so hard within 2 hours after, and before they could be got a quarter of their way, that I could not suppose their boat could live, or that they ever reached their own coast. But to return to Friday, he was so busy about his father that I could not find in my heart to take him off for some time. But after I thought he could leave him a little, I called him to me, and he came jumping and laughing and greatly pleased. Well, then I asked him if he had given his father any bread. He shook his head and said, "None. Ugly dog eat all up self." I then gave him a cake of bread out of a little pouch I carried on purpose. I had in my pocket also 2 or 3 bunches of raisins, so I gave him a handful of them for his father. He had no sooner given his father these raisins, but I saw him come out of the boat and run away as if he had been bewitched. And in a quarter of an hour I saw him come back again, though not so fast as he went. When he came up to me, I found he had been quite home for an earthen jug or pot to bring his father some fresh water, also 2 loaves of bread. When his father had drunk, I called to him to know if there was any water left. He said, yes, and I bade him give to the poor Spaniard, who was in as much want of it as his father. And I sent one of the cakes that Friday brought to the Spaniard too, who was very weak and was lying upon the green place under the shade of a tree, and whose limbs were also very stiff, and very much swelled with the rude bandage he had tied it with. So I bade him sit still while Friday rubbed and bathed his ankles. I then spoke to the Spaniard to let Friday help him up, and led him to the boat. But Friday, a lusty young fellow, took the Spaniard quite on his back, and carried him away to the boat, and set him down softly close to his father, and presently, stepping out again, launched the boat off, and paddled it along the shore faster than I could walk, though the wind blew pretty hard too. So we brought them both safe into our creek, and leaving them in the boat, runs away to fetch the other canoe. So he wafted me over, and then went to help our new guests out of the boat, which he did, but they were neither of them able to walk, so that poor Friday knew not what to do. To remedy this, I soon made a kind of hand barrow to lay them on, and Friday and I carried them up both together upon it between us. But when we got them to the outside of our wall or fort, we were at a worse loss than before, for it was impossible to get them over. So I set to work again, and Friday and I, in about 2 hours' time, made a very handsome tent, covered with old sails, and above that with boughs of trees, being in the space without our outward fence, and between that and the grove of young wood which I had planted. And here we made them 2 beds. My island was now peopled, and I thought myself very rich in subjects, and it was a merry idea, which I more than once made, how like a king I looked. First of all, the whole country was my own property, so that I had the right of dominion. Secondly, my people were perfectly subjected. I was the lord and lawgiver. They all owed their lives to me, and were ready to lay down their lives, if there had been occasion for it, for me. It was remarkable, too. I had but 3 subjects, and they were of 3 different religions. My man Friday was a Protestant, his father was a pagan and a cannibal, and the Spaniard was a papist. As soon as I had secured my 2 weak prisoners and given them shelter and a place to rest them upon, I began to think of making some provision for them. And the first thing I did, I ordered Friday to take a yearling goat, betwixt a kid and a goat, out of my own flock to be killed. When I cut off the hind quarter and chopped it into small pieces, I set Friday to work to boiling and stewing, and made them a very good dish, I assure you, of flesh and broth, having put some barley and rice also in the broth. And as I cooked it without doors, for I made no fire within my inner wall, so I carried it all into the new tent. And having set a table there for them, I sat down, and ate my own dinner also with them, and as well as I could, cheered them and encouraged them. Friday was my interpreter, especially to his father, and indeed to the Spaniard too, for the Spaniard spoke the language of the savages pretty well. After we had supped, I ordered Friday to take one of the canoes and go and fetch our muskets and other firearms, which, for want of time, we had left upon the place of battle. And the next day I ordered him to go and bury the dead bodies of the savages, which lay open to the sun, and would presently be offensive. I also ordered him to bury the horrid remains of their barbarous feast, which I could not think of doing myself. Nay, I could not bear to see them, if I went that way, all which he did, and to face the very appearance of the savages being there, so that, when I went again, I could scarce know where it was, otherwise than by the corner of the wood pointing to the place. I then began to enter into a little talk with my 2 new subjects, and first I set Friday to ask his father what he thought of the escape of the savages in that canoe, and whether we might expect a return of them with a power too great for us to resist. He first thought that the savages in the boat could never live out the storm which blew that night they went off, but must be drowned or driven south to those other shores, And it was his idea that they were so scared with the manner of their being attacked, the noise and fire, that he believed they would tell people they were all killed by thunder and lightning, not by the hand of man. And this old savage was in the right, for as I understood since, by other hands, the savages never tried to go over to the island afterward. They were so terrified with the accounts given by those 4 men, for it seems they did escape the sea, that they believed whoever went to that island would be killed with fire from the gods. This I knew not, and therefore was under constant fear for a good while, and kept always upon my guard. I and all my army, for as we were now 4 of us, I would have ventured upon 100 of them, fairly in the open field, at any time. In a little time, no more canoes appearing, the fear of their coming wore off, and I began to take my former thoughts of a voyage to the main, being assured by Friday's father that I might depend upon good usage from their nation, on his account, if I would go. But my thoughts were a little upset when I had serious talk with the Spaniard, and when I understood that there were 16 more of his people, who, having been cast away and made their escape to that side, lived there at peace indeed with the savages, but were very sore put to it for the means to live. I asked him all the story of their voyage, and how he thought they would perceive a proposal from me, which might tend towards an escape, and whether, if they were all here, it might not be done. He told me they were all of them very civil, honest men, and they were under great distress, having neither weapons nor clothes, nor any food, but at the mercy of the savages, out of all hopes of ever getting back to their own country, and that he was sure if I would go to their relief, they would live and die by me. By the advice of the Spaniard, it was decided to put off doing anything for his comrades for at least half a year. The case was thus. He had been with us now about a month, during which time I had let him see in what manner I provided for my support, and he saw what stock of corn and rice I had laid up, which, though it was more than enough for myself, yet it was not enough, without good care, for my family. Now it was raised to 4. But much less would it go around if his people, who were, as he said, 14, still alive, should come over. Now, having a full supply of food for all the guests expected, I gave the Spaniard leave to take Friday's father and go over to the main, to see what he could do with those he had left behind him there. I gave him a strict charge not to bring any man with him who would not first swear that he would no way injure, fight with, or attack the person he should find in the island, who was so kind as to send for them, but that they would stand by him and defend him against all such attempts, and wherever they went would be entirely under and subject to his orders. I gave each of them a musket with a firelock on it and about 8 ounces of powder and ball, charging them to be careful of both, and not to use either of them but upon urgent occasion. This was a cheerful work, being the first measures used by me to help my deliverance, for now 27 years and some days. I gave them bread and dried grapes, enough for themselves for many days, and enough for all the Spaniards for about 8 days' time. And wishing them a good voyage, I saw them go, agreeing with them about a signal they should hang out at their return, by which I should know them again, when they come back, at a distance, before they came on shore. It was no less than 8 days I had waited for them, when a strange accident happened, of which the like has not been heard of in history. I was fast asleep in my hutch one morning, when my man Friday came running in to me and called out, "Master, master, they are come, they are come!" I jumped up and went out as soon as I could get my clothes on, through my little grove, which, by the way, was by this time grown to be a very thick wood. I went without my arms, which was not my custom to do, but I was surprised when, turning my eyes to the sea, I saw a boat at about 1.5 leagues distance, standing in for the shore, with a shoulder of mutton sail, as they call it, and the wind blowing pretty fair to bring them in. Also I saw that they did not come from that side which the shore lay on, but from the south end of the island. Upon this I called Friday in and bade him lie close, for these were not the people we looked for, and that we might not know yet whether they were friends or enemies. In the next place I went in to fetch my glass, to see what I could make of them, and having climbed up to the top of the hill, when I saw a ship lying at anchor. It seemed to be an English ship, and the boat looked like an English long boat. They ran their boat on shore upon the beach, at about 1/2 mile from me, which was very happy for me. else they would have landed just at my door, as I may say, and would soon have beaten me out of my castle, and perhaps have plundered me out of all I had. When they were on shore, I saw they were Englishmen. There were in all 11 men, whereof 3 of them I found were unarmed, and, as I thought, bound. And when the first 4 or 5 of them were jumped on shore, they took these 3 out of the boat as prisoners. One of the 3 I could see using the gestures of entreaty and despair. The other 2 I could see lifted up their hands and appeared concerned, but not to such a degree as the first. I was perfectly shocked at the sight, and knew not what the meaning of it should be. I expected to see the 3 prisoners killed every minute, so I fitted myself up for a battle, though with more caution, knowing that I had to do with another kind of enemy than I had at first. I ordered Friday also to load himself with arms. I took myself 2 fowling pieces, and I gave him 3 muskets. My figure was very fierce. I had my goatskin coat on, with the great cap, a naked sword, 2 pistols in my belt, and a gun upon each shoulder. It was my design not to have made any attempt till it was dark, but about 2 o'clock, being the heat of the day, I found in short they were all gone straggling into the woods, and as I thought, were all laid down to sleep. The 3 poor distressed men, too anxious for their condition to get any sleep, had, however, sat down under the shelter of a great tree. I resolved to discover myself to them and learn something of their condition. Immediately I marched as above, my man Friday at a good distance behind me, as formidable for his arms as I, but not making quite so staring a spectre-like figure as I did. I came as near them undiscovered as I could, and then before any of them saw me, I called aloud to them in Spanish, "Who are ye, sirs?" They gave a start at my voice and at my strange dress, and made a move as if they would fly from me. I said, "Do not fear me, for it may be that you have a friend at hand, though you do not think it." "He must be sent from the sky, then," said one of them with a grave look, and he took off his hat to me at the same time. "All help is from thence, sir," I said. "But what can I do to aid you? You look as if you had some load of grief on your breast. I saw one of the men lift his sword as if to kill you." The tears ran down the poor man's face as he said, "Is this a god, or is it but a man?" "I have no doubt on that score, sir," said I, "for a god would not have come to you with a dress like this. No, do not fear, nor raise your hopes too high, for you see but a man, yet one who will do all he can to help you. Your speech shows me that you come from the same land as I do. I will do all I can to serve you. Tell me your case." "Our case, sir, is too long to tell you. Well, they who would kill us were so near. My name is Paul. To be short, sir, my crew have thrust me out of my ship, which you see out here, and have left me here to die. It was as much I could do to make them sheathe their swords, which you saw were drawn to slay me. They have set me down in this isle with these 2 men, my friend here, and the ship's mate." "Where have they gone?" said I. "They are in the woods close by. I fear they may have seen and heard us. If they have, they will be sure to kill us all." "Have they firearms?" "They have 4 guns, one of which is in the boat." "Well, then leave all to me." "Well, there are 2 of the men," said he, "who are worse than the rest. But all but these I feel sure would go back to work the ship." I thought it was best to speak out to Paul at once, and I said, "Now, if I save your life, there are 2 things which you must do." But he read my thoughts and said, "If you save my life, you shall do as you like with me and my ship, and take her where you please." I saw that the 2 men, in whose charge the boat had been left, had come on shore, so the first thing I did was to send Friday to fetch from it the oars, the sail, and the gun. And now the ship might be said to be in our hands. When the time came for the men to go back to the ship, they were in a great rage, for as the boat had now no sail nor oars, they knew not how to get out to their ship. We heard them say that it was a strange sort of isle, for that spirits had come to the boat to take off the sails and oars. We could see them run to and fro with great rage, and then go and sit in the boat to rest, and then come on shore once more. When they drew near to us, Paul and Friday would fain to have me fall on them at once, but my wish was to spare them and kill as few as I could. I told 2 of my men to creep on their hands and feet close to the ground, so that they might not be seen, and when they got up to the men, not to fire till I gave the word. We had not stood thus long, when 3 of the crew came up to us. Till now we had but heard their voices, but when they came so near as to be seen, Paul and Friday stood up and shot at them. 2 of the men fell dead, and they were the worst of the crew, and the 3rd ran off. At the sound of the guns I came up, but it was so dark that the men could not tell if there were 3 of us or 60. It fell out just as I could wish, for I heard the men ask, "To whom must we yield, and where are they?" Friday told them that Paul was there with the king of the isle, who had brought with him a crowd of men. At this, one of the crew said, "If Paul will spare our lives, we will yield." "Well then," said Friday, "you shall know the king's will." Well then Paul said to them, "You know my voice. If you lay down your arms, the king will spare your lives." They fell on their knees to beg the same of me. I took good care that they did not see me, but I gave them my word that they should all live, that I should take 4 of them to work the ship, and that the rest would be bound hand and foot for the good faith of the 4. This was to show them what a stern king I was. Of course, I soon set them free, and I put them in a way to take my place on the isle. I told them all of my ways, taught them how to mind the goats, how to work the farm and make the bread. I gave them a house to live in, firearms, tools, and my 2 tame cats. In fact, all but Pole and my gold. As I sat on top of the hill, Paul came up to me. He held out his hand to point to the ship, and with much warmth took me into his arms and said, "My dear friend, there is your ship, for she is all yours, and so are we, and all that is in her." I made ready to go on board the ship, but told the captain I would stay that night to get my things in shape, and asked him to go on board in the meantime and keep things right on the ship, and send the boat on shore next day for me. I told him to take the worst of the 2 men who were killed and hang him at the yard arm, that these men might see him. I cast my eyes to the ship, which rode half a mile off the shore at the mouth of the creek, and near the place where I had brought my raft to the land. Yes, there she stood, the ship that was set to set me free, and to take me where I might choose to go. I set her sails to the wind, and her flags threw out their gay stripes in the breeze. Such a sight was too much for me, and I fell down faint with joy. Friday and Paul then went on board the ship, and Paul took charge of her once more. We did not start that night, but at noon the next day I left the isle, that lone isle, where I had spent so a great part of my life. When I took leave of this island, I carried on board the great goatskin cap I had made, my umbrella, and one of my parrots. Also the money which had lain by me so long useless that it was grown rusty or tarnished, and could hardly pass for silver till it had been rubbed and handled, and also the money I found in the wreck of the Spanish ship. And thus I left the island, the 19th of December, as I found by the ship's account, in the year 1686, after I had been upon it 28 years, 2 months, and 19 days, being delivered from the 2nd captivity the same day of the month that I first made my escape from among the Moors. In this vessel, after a long voyage, I arrived in England the 11th of June, in the year 1687, having been 35 years absent. The end. Thank you.